The cost of production. This chapter is pretty technical and it's full of definitions and graph. However, most of the materials are not overly analytical. Um, but given the potential for your lack of business experience, some of you may struggle with the relevance of the material. Just keep in mind this really is a fantastic primer for those of you that are interested in going into business, and in particular businesses and services that focus a lot on production. Um, uh, this chapter really provides a foundation for some chapters moving forward. Um, Concepts like how firms and different market structures use cost concepts that are introduced in this chapter to make decisions about how much stuff to produce, what price to charge for their products, and so on and so forth. So, learning that material is going to be much easier for you if you get a good grasp on the fundamental materials in this chapter. So, let's start with a little brainstorming. Let's say you run Ford Motor Company. Congratulations, you just got a massive promotion. Let's list 3 different costs you have as the person who runs Ford Motor Company, and then let's think about 3 different business decisions that are affected by your costs. Now, some examples of costs for Ford Motor Company would be wages and benefits, cost of intermediate inputs like engine parts and tires and different parts for a car, rent, advertising, though advertising is not technically a production cost. Some examples of decisions affected by your costs is how many workers do you hire? What size of factory do you build? What price do you charge for your end product? And how many of each type of vehicles do you produce? They produce a lot of different vehicles. How do you decide which ones you want to produce? So let's take a look at profit. And to do that, also have to examine total revenue and total costs, which we've discussed previously. We assume the firm's goal is to maximize profit. That's generally a safe assumption in a free market. Profit is simply total revenue minus total cost. Now, total revenue is the amount the firm receives from the sale of its output, and total cost is simply the market value of the inputs of a firm uses in its production. So what it takes to put all those parts together to build a car in the Ford Motor example. Now, we need to really define costs here. There are 2 types of costs, explicit and implicit. Explicit costs require an outlay of money, for example, paying wages to workers. Now, implicit costs do not require a cash outlay. For example, the opportunity cost of the owner's time. So if you take time to produce one car versus another, that's an opportunity cost. Or you take time to produce cars versus producing refrigerators. Those are opportunity costs. You make a conscious choice to produce one over the other. So remember back to chapter 1, the 10 principles. The cost of something is what you give up to get it. So that speaks towards opportunity cost. This is true whether the costs are implicit or explicit, but both matter in firms' decisions. So an example of explicit versus implicit costs, you need $100,000 to start your business. The interest rate is 5%. In case 1, you borrow $100,000 and your explicit cost is $5,000 interest in the loan. Again, the rate is 5% of $100,000. In case 2, you use $40,000 of your savings and borrow the other $60,000. So the explicit cost is 5% interest on the loan, which is $3,000. So 5% of $60,000. And the implicit cost is $2,000, which is the 5% interest. It's foregone interest, rather, you could have earned on your $40,000. So you spend your $40,000. You could have invested it and got an interest rate return of 5%. So that's your implicit cost. You gave that up. Again, your opportunity cost there. In both cases, total, that's explicit versus implicit costs, are $5,000. They're just divided differently. In case 1, there's only explicit costs because you borrowed the entire $100,000. In case 2, There are explicit costs, the interest on the loan once again, but also implicit costs, which is your opportunity cost of investing that $40,000 rather than spending it in your business. So in case 2, the foregone interest is the interest you could have earned on your savings. It, again, is an opportunity cost. This example shows that an important implicit cost is the cost of capital. The foregone returns you could have earned had you used your savings to buy bonds or other assets, investing it, for example, instead of investing them in your business. So the hope here is that you will see that what really matters is not just explicit costs, but also but total costs, which include implicit costs. So that's the big difference between economics and, say, a field like accounting, in that we consider opportunity costs, and your implicit costs are related to your opportunity cost. So again, economic profit versus accounting profit. Accounting profit, simply total revenue minus total explicit costs, costs that you can see, tangible costs. Now, economic profit is expanded. It is total revenue minus total costs. So again, look at that again. Accounting profit, total revenue minus total explicit costs, whereas economic profit, we're going to consider total revenue minus total costs, which include explicit and implicit costs. So we're including economic opportunity costs when we are calculating economic profit. Accounting profit ignores implicit costs, so it's generally higher than economic profit, because economic profit is going to also factor in total costs, which includes opportunity costs and implicit costs. Accountants keep track of how much money flows into and out of a firm, so they ignore implicit costs. Economists study the pricing and production decisions of a firm, which are affected by implicit as well as explicit costs. You can't look at a balance sheet and see if a company is deciding whether to produce one car versus producing a pickup truck, or if a company is deciding whether to produce vehicles versus producing refrigerators. That doesn't show up on a balance sheet, but somewhere in a boardroom, there are leaders of a firm that are making that decision. Hey, what product should we produce? So working through a learning activity here, economic profit versus accounting profit. The equilibrium rent on office space has just increased by $500 a month. Determine the effects on accounting profit and the economic profit if you A, rent your office space, or B, own your office space. The rent on an office increases by $500 a month. You rent your office space, explicit costs, those accounting costs, increase by $500 a month. That's pretty straightforward. Accounting profit and economic profit each fall by $500 a month, so that's pretty straightforward. If you own your own office space, the explicit costs do not change. Again, that's what we just went through in part A. So the accounting profit does not change. However, the economic profit is going to consider implicit costs, your opportunity costs, and your implicit costs increase by $500 a month. In other words, your opportunity cost of using your space instead of renting it. So economic profit falls by $500 a month. So if you choose to continue to use your office space, you're giving up the right to instead rent it out to someone else and gain an additional $500 a month. So you consider that opportunity cost. Now, when we're talking about production, one of the most common terms and one of the most important terms is the production function. A production function shows the relationship between the quantity of inputs used to produce a good and the quantity of output of that good. It can be represented by a table, more commonly represented by an equation or a graph. An example here is Farmer Jack grows wheat. He has 5 acres of land. He's a small farmer. He can hire as many workers as he wants. In the following slides, we're going to use example 1 to illustrate the production function marginal product and take a first look at the costs of productions. So keep in mind Farmer Jack growing wheat on 5 acres and can hire as many workers as he wants. Now, here is Farmer Jack's production function. Simply labor and quantity. Okay, labor is the number of workers he hires to help him grow the wheat, and quantity is the bushels of wheat that he produces. 0 workers, 0 wheat. 1 worker, 1,000 bushels. 2 workers, 1,800, so on and so forth, all the way up to, in this example, 5 workers and 3,000 bushels. Simply graphed number of workers by quantity of input. We just, 0 workers, 0 input. 2 workers, 1,800 bushels of wheat, so on and so forth, all the way up to 5 workers and 3,000 bushels of wheat. So we have these dots, and then we play everybody's favorite game, connect the dots, and this line here is his production function. Now, let's take a look at marginal product. Again, in economics, you need to think marginal means one more. What's the product I get from hiring one more worker? If Jack hires one more worker, his output rises by the marginal product of labor. So the marginal product of any input, in this case labor, is the increase in output arising from an additional unit of that input. So if Jack hires one more worker, how does his output rises? What happens to his output? Does it rise? That's your marginal product of labor. And by how much? So again, the marginal product of any input is the increase in output arising from the additional unit of that input, holding all other inputs constant. So saying nothing else changes, we're just going to look at what changes if we increase our labor pool by 1 worker. So one notation here you will see in economics is this little triangle looking thing. That's called a delta. Okay, see the delta here? That indicates a change in. So for example, a delta Q is change in quantity. It's a change in output here. And delta L is a change in labor. So you'll just hear me say, okay, change in quantity, change in labor, and you'll understand now that this delta here means a change in quantity, a change in labor. So marginal product of labor, often abbreviated MPL, is simply the change in quantity over the change in labor. How does quantity change when you change the number of people you hire? So continuing example 1, the farmer example, we have again the number of workers 0 through 5, the number of bushels produced 0 through 3,000, and then we look how it changes by adding 1 worker, by adding another worker, by adding a 3rd worker, a 4th worker. Each one of these changes is adding 1 more worker. So the change in labor is one more worker. Okay, that's what you're seeing here. You're going from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, so on and so forth. Then this is the change in quantity, going from 0 to 1,000 bushels, 1,000 bushels to 1,800 bushels to 2,400 bushels, all the way up to 3,000 bushels. So the change in quantity here is 1,000, goes up 800, goes up 600, goes up 400, goes up 200. Now what you start to see is diminishing returns. Okay, goes up 1,000, goes up 800, goes up 600, goes up 400, goes up 200. Each time it's starting to have a diminishing return. Now your marginal product of labor again is that change in quantity given the change in labor. So 1,000 bushels over 1 more worker is 1,000. Adding 1 more worker here gets you 800, 600, 400, 200. Now this mirrors the change in quantity because we're only adding 1 laborer here at a time. Now in the real world, in a more complex example, you're looking at adding, say, hey, 33 more workers. You're expanding your factory. It's going to create 75 new jobs. What's your marginal product of labor going to be? You always see those numbers in the news. How did they decide how many workers to hire? Well, they're doing a simple marginal product of labor calculation. So the slope of the production function, again, these are the same dots we did before based on number of workers and then the quantity of output. And we connected the dots. Well, what is the slope of this line? Obviously, it's not a constant slope because it shoots up here. You have a change to this point, and you have a different slope here and a different slope there, and then an overall leveling off here. Okay. Well, your marginal product of labor is that slope from this point to that point, and from 1 worker to 2 workers, and from 3 workers to 4 workers, and from 2,400 bushels to 2,800 bushels, from 2,800 bushels to 3,000 bushels. Okay, so that marginal product of labor is your slope of your production function. So why is marginal product of labor important? Recall one of the 10 principles from Chapter 1, rational people think at the margin. When Farmer Jack hires an extra worker, his costs rise by the wage he pays that worker. So he's got some additional explicit costs coming out. His output rises by the marginal product of labor. So comparing the output to the cost, this helps Jack decide whether he should hire another worker. Thinking at the margin not only helps not only Jack, but all the managers in the real world who make business decisions every day by comparing the marginal costs with the marginal benefits. So we saw that marginal product diminishes. Why does it diminish? Well, Farmer Jack's output rises by a smaller and smaller amount with each additional worker. Well, why? As Jack adds workers, the average worker has less land to work with. Again, he's only working with 5 acres. And thus they will be less productive. Early on, as you add workers, there's a lot of space. Workers can produce more product. You can think about this in terms of a factory as well. If you keep adding machines and workers, eventually you're going to run out of room. And you're going to be, as you add one more, it's going to be less productive. In general, marginal product of labor diminishes as labor rises, whether the fixed input is land or capital, i.e. the equipment in a factory, machines in a factory, space in a factory. Diminishing marginal product, thus, is the marginal product of an input declines as the quantity of input increases, other things being equal. So in example 1, Farmer Jack's cost, Farmer Jack must pay $1,000 per month for the land, say he's renting the land, regardless of how much wheat he grows. So that's a fixed cost. The market wage for a farm worker is $2,000 a month. All right. So Farmer Jack's costs are related to how much wheat he produces. Again, we have number of workers, bushels produced. The cost of land is fixed at $1,000 a month. All right, that's irrespective of how many workers or how many bushels he produces. He's got to pay $1,000 a month. Well, we know a laborer costs $2,000 a month. When you got one of them, you're paying $2,000. When you got 2 of them, you're paying $4,000, all the way up to 5 of them, and $10,000 a month. The total cost, thus, is the summation of this: $1,000. 2 plus 1 is 3. 1 plus 4 is 5. So on and so forth. To 10,000 plus 1 is 11,000. Very simple calculation there. Here's his total cost curve. We had this total cost we just calculated here. We're going to say, hey, to produce this many bushels of wheat, we're going to have a total cost of this. In this example, you don't have any workers, you're not producing any wheat, but you're still paying $1,000 a month for the land. Here, you're paying to produce 3,000 bushels of wheat. Your costs are 11,000. Well, you can just simply place your dots here on the graph. Okay. And then connect the dots, and you have a total cost curve. Hopefully very straightforward for you. Now let's take a look at marginal cost. That's where we want to think at the margin. So marginal cost, often abbreviated MC, is the increase in total cost from producing one more unit. So again, marginal cost is the change in total cost given the change in quantity that we produce. So let's take a look at an example of total and marginal cost. We've covered total cost here. We have the bushels of wheat. We all know where these numbers now come from. We have a change in quantity, 1,000, going up 800, going up 600, from 1,800 to 2,400, from 2,400 to 2,800, change in quantity of 400, and 2,800 to 3,000 is change in quantity of 200. We have a change in total cost from 1,000 to 3,000 is 2,000. So on and so forth. From 5 to 7 is 2,000. From 9 to 11 is 2,000. So that's constant. Now our marginal cost, again, our marginal cost is the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. So the change in total cost divided by the change in quantity. Marginal cost of additional unit here is, of the additional units here is $2, $2.50, $3.33, $5, and $10. Again, this would be change in total cost divided by change in total quantity. So in this example, $2,000 divided by the change in total quantity is $10. So our marginal cost goes up as we add, as we produce more bushels of wheat, because our total costs go up. But where do we operate? So to help us answer that, we need to plot our points again. At our marginal cost at 1,000, at a quantity by our quantities, and we have our points right here. So $2, $2.50, $3.33, so on and so forth, $5, all the way up to $10, and we just connect the dots, and we have what's called a marginal cost curve. That's where a marginal cost curve comes from, and the shape and the slopes are these changes. So why is marginal cost important? Farmer Jack is rational and wants to maximize his profit. To increase profit, should he produce more or less wheat? He has to decide how much wheat he wants to produce, how many workers he wants to hire. To find the answer, Farmer Jack needs to, quote unquote, think at the margin. If the cost of additional wheat, which is marginal cost, is less than the revenue he will get from selling it, then Jack's profits rise if he produces more. We're going to tie all this together before we get through the slide. Before we get through the slide set, I promise you. It's just a few more concepts we have to look at. Fixed costs do not vary with the quantity of output produced. For Farmer Jack, the fixed cost is $1,000 for his land. Other examples could be cost of equipment, like diesel to run a tractor, so on and so forth. Loan payments he has to make every month, rent. Variable costs vary with the quantity produced. For Farmer Jack in this example, his variable costs are the wages he pays workers. Other examples could be cost of materials, how much fertilizer he decides to put out, how much seed he wants to plant. But the big one here, we're looking at variable costs, is wages related to the number of workers he decides to hire. That can vary depending on the number of workers he hires. Total cost then is the fixed cost plus the variable cost. In activity 1, we were looking at the car manufacturer's costs. Some of those costs in the list were fixed, and some of those costs were variable, if you think about that. But for Farmer Jack, we're looking at here, $1,000 for his land is fixed, and the wages he pays his workers is variable, because he can decide how many workers he wants to hire. So let's take a look at a second example, which is more general and applies to any type of firm and producing any type of good or with any type of input. So this is kind of a broad example in part 2. Now, here's the quantities we're producing. We have a fixed cost of $100. This is a very generic example. We have a variable cost that changes as we produce more. It goes up, as you can see here. And thus the total cost is just the fixed cost plus the variable cost. Simple mathematics here will get you, sorry about that. We'll get you the totals of total costs. All right, so now we put the monetary costs on the vertical axis here, and on the horizontal axis we simply have quantity. So dollars on the vertical and quantity produced on this. So then we graph, simple plot your dots and connect the dots, and blue is the fixed cost, is flat because fixed cost is flat. Variable cost starts low but goes up as you produce more quantity. As you produce more quantity, variable cost gets higher, so you have this line here. And total cost, the green line here, is simply your variable cost plus your fixed cost. All right. Well, a marginal cost, now that we have total cost, we can calculate marginal cost as we move from a quantity of 0 to 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, so on and so forth, all the way up in this example to 7. So we have the change in total cost here, 70, that's your marginal cost. Change going from 170 to 220 is 50. So on and so forth, 50 to 40 marginal cost, back up to 50, 70, 100, 140. What you see here is your marginal costs initially start up high and they decline. You see 70 to 50 to 40, but what happens here is they start going back up to 50, 70, 100. Over time, your marginal costs start to climb back out. So initially they're high, and then you gain some efficiency and they decrease. You bottom out, and eventually marginal costs as you produce more and more goods. Say in this example, this is 1,000 goods and this is 7,000 goods. As you produce more and more goods, your costs eventually start to rise. Just like with Farmer Jack, as he hires more and more workers, his costs for paying those wages rise. The initial cost is high, you gain some efficiency and it goes down. You can think of a marginal cost curve as like a Nike symbol, the little check mark. Okay, if that helps. All right, well, let's look at average fixed costs. you could probably quickly grasp the following example. Suppose fixed cost is $1 million for a factory to produce cars. So you just have to pay that to have a factory to produce cars. If a firm produces a quantity, let's say 1 car, then average fixed cost is $1 million. If they produce 2 cars, average fixed cost is $500,000. If a firm produces 5 cars, average fixed cost is $1 million divided by 5, which is $200,000. If they produce 100 cars, average fixed cost per car is $10,000. The more cars produced at the factory, the smaller the cost of the factory per car. So we're looking at average fixed cost. We're looking at your fixed cost divided by the quantity. In this example, 100 divided by 1, 100 divided by 2, 100 divided by 3, so on and so forth, all the way up to 7. Well, what happens as you produce more quantity, the average fixed costs go down. So it has a negative slope here. Now, average variable costs. Again, we're just talking about average fixed costs, and we're talking about average variable costs. We have your variable costs. Just like we had a column here with fixed costs, we have a column here with our variable costs. We know total cost is fixed costs plus variable costs. So you have your variable costs here. Again, quantity, variable cost divided by the quantity. You have 70, 120 is your variable cost divided by 2. But what we know about variable costs is they tend to increase as you increase the number of quantities produced. So all the way up to 520 divided by 7. Okay, so 74.29. So what you see here is a little high initially. You produce more, you gain some efficiencies, but over time your variable costs start to increase at an increasing rate. So you divide that by your quantity, and you get a curve that looks a little bit like this. So average variable costs. A lot of different curves we're going through here. Now, all on the same table. Total cost, average fixed cost, average variable cost. Now, average total cost, this ATC, equals the total cost divided by the quantity of output. So total cost divided by quantity. Okay, here we have no quantity, so we have no average total cost. Here we have 1 quantity, total cost is 170, which is the fixed cost plus is the average variable cost. And so average total cost is 170, all the way up to a quantity of 7, which has a total cost of 620. So 620 divided by 7 is 88.57. So really a lot thrown at you right now. Take deep breaths. The homework's going to help you work through calculating each one of these. And once you get into it, you realize, okay, this is actually very simple. Average total cost is just your total cost divided by the quantity you produced. And then also your average total cost is also your average fixed cost plus your average variable cost. So remember before you said, okay, total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. Well, average total cost is simply average fixed cost plus average variable cost. Total cost, average total cost is simply the average, the total cost divided by the chosen quantity you produce. Many of you may have heard the terms cost per unit or unit cost in other business courses. Average total cost means the same thing. So we're just looking at it on a per unit basis. So example 2, average total cost. We had our total cost here. We had a quantity of 170 divided by 1. That's an easy calculation. Quantity of 2, 220. We're taking our total cost that we calculated previously and divided by 2 is 110. So on and so forth, all the way up to total cost of 620 divided by 7 is 88.57 is your average total cost. And you just plot that and connect the dots, and you have your average total cost curve. Okay, put all these graphs together. That's a lot. That's a lot. That is a lot to look at. Let's start at the bottom here. Let's find our marginal cost curve. Always look, if you're trying to identify the marginal cost curve, look for the one that looks like the Nike swoosh. Here's your marginal cost curve here in orange. Your average fixed cost here in the darker blue. Okay. Your average variable cost right here in the blue, and then average total cost is always going to be the one at the top of the heap. That starts at the top of the heap because it is the total. And then your marginal cost here is very, very important. Always look for that Nike swoosh. So calculating costs, we'll fill in the blanks in this table. This is very similar to what you're going to see on the homework and in on a test. You're going you're going to be given all this information in spots, and you're going to have to figure out how to calculate variable costs here, total costs here, average fixed costs here. So basically, you're going to need to know the formulas, because if you're given part of it, you can solve for, let's say, average fixed costs at a quantity of 1. Now, filled in here, first deduce that fixed cost is $50, okay? And then use fixed cost plus variable cost is total cost. And then you can work your way through average fixed cost, average variable cost, and average total cost. Obviously, with a quantity of 0, you don't have an average fixed cost, average variable cost, average total cost. But with a quantity of 1, you see that your fixed cost, you deduce that your $50 is your fixed cost. Well, average fixed cost then divided by 1 is 50. And then if your fixed cost is 50, average fixed cost is 25 when divided by 2. Again, average fixed cost is simply your fixed cost divided by your quantity produced. So on and so forth all the way up to 6. Excuse me, did not mean to go there yet. And then you can take your changes once you have the variable costs in and your average total cost in. Again, average total cost is simply your total cost divided by your quantity. Your average variable cost is simply your variable cost that you figured out here divided by your quantity as well. And then once you have this whole table filled in, you can go and say, okay, well, how much did it change here? Your marginal cost here is 10. You were given that. It goes to 20, 30, 40, 50, and 60, so on and so forth. So pretty straightforward there. Great examples in the book, and then also we'll work some in class, and then your homeworks as well. Now, why does average total cost usually U-shaped? Well, it's simple. As quantity rises, initially there's a falling average fixed cost, and that pulls average total cost down. All right. Eventually, average variable costs start to rise and pulls average total costs up. This is known as the efficiency scale. It's the quantity that minimizes, or excuse me, this is just a natural phenomenon of the curve, but what you need to know at the bottoming out is the efficiency scale, which is the quantity that minimizes average total cost. So really where you want to operate as a business owner is where your costs are minimized. And that, if you're operating in that area right here that you see highlighted by my cursor, that is operating in the efficiency scale, the quantity that minimizes average total cost. In this example, the efficiency scale is Q equals 5, where average total cost is $76. So it's the very bottom of that U-shaped average total cost curve. So that's really where you want to be. At any quantity below or above 5, the average total cost is greater than 76. So it's higher than 76 if at 4, and it's higher than 76 at 6. So you want to operate at the very bottom of this curve. So the textbook gives a nice analogy to help you understand this. A student's GPA is like average total cost. The grade she earns in her next course is like marginal cost. If the next grade marginal cost is less than her GPA, which could be the same as average total cost, then her GPA will fall. It'll pull it down. If her next grade, just like marginal cost, is greater than her GPA, that effect on average total cost, then her GPA will rise. It'll pull it up. Definitely read the GPA example in the book, and I'll try to. I can give you another example right here. Also try to repeat it in class, but if you run a pizza joint, you're producing 100 pizzas per night, and your cost per pizza, your average total cost is $3. So the cost of producing one more pizza, your marginal cost is let's say the cost of producing one more pizza, your marginal cost is $2. If you produce this pizza, what happens to average total cost? Well, most of you will understand immediately the average total cost falls, albeit by a small amount. But instead, suppose the cost of producing one more pizza is $4, so your marginal cost went up. Then producing the additional pizza causes the average total cost to rise. So marginal cost is going to cause the average total cost to either be going down, See here, you see average total cost is going down, marginal cost is going down. But as you see marginal cost start to pull up, there's an upward pressure on average total cost. And when marginal cost crosses the average total cost, you see the bottoming out end and your average total cost starting to be pulled up. So think of this as like a magnet. It's pulling it down. It's still below it. It's still going down. But once you reach this point right here, where it crosses the average total cost curve, it pulls the average total cost curve upwards. So your marginal cost starts to pull it up. So you minimize, you have this efficiency scale right here at the bottom of this average total cost curve, where it bottoms out. So costs in the short and long run. The short run, some inputs are fixed. For example, you have a fixed area of factory. You have your factory built. You can't really change it in the short run. You have a certain amount of land if you're Farmer Jack that you can't change in the short run. These costs, the cost of these inputs are a fixed cost, and in the long run, all inputs are variable. For example, firms can build bigger factories. They can sell their existing ones, move to a different area with more land, more factory capability, buy new machines. You can do all those things in the long run. Farmer Jack can buy more land in the long run. So in the long run, average total cost at any quantity is the cost per unit using the most efficient mix of inputs for that quantity. So for example, the factory size with the lowest average total cost, you have more variability. You can choose to produce at a level that minimizes your average total cost. But in the short run, you're sort of handicapped. You have your given set of land, of factory. You're given that building with the certain machines that you have that you can't change in the short run. You just have to minimize your total cost given the hand that you're dealt. In the long run, you can change the hand that you're dealt. So let's move on to example 3. When we look at short run and long run, in this example we're looking at the long run average total cost curve. That's what that stands for. That's just a shorthand for long run average total cost with 3 factory sizes. Okay, we have factory that's small, factory that's medium, and factory that's large. We have the average total cost curve for a small factory, the average total cost curve for a medium factory, and the average total cost curve for a large factory. So the firm can choose 3 factory sizes, small, medium, and large. Each size has its own curve in the short run average total cost curve. If you start out with a small factory in the short run, you're not going to be able to do anything about that. In the long run, you can move up to a medium or a large, or you can have a large factory in the short run and move back to a medium, small, what have you in the long run. So short run, things are kind of fixed. The firm can change to a different factory size in the long run, but not in the short run. So to produce less than quantity A, the firm will choose a size small in the long run, so size S in the long run. So if you just want to produce quantity A, you're going to gravitate to an average total cost curve associated with a smaller factory. To produce between quantity A and B, the firm will have to choose size a medium-sized factory in the long run. Okay, so if they want to be producing this much quantity, they're going to need a bigger factory. And if they want to produce out here, they're going to need a larger factory. So to produce more than quantity B, the firm will be best served in the long run moving to a larger factory. Again, why? Well, we want to operate where average total cost is minimized. Average total cost is minimized, and average total cost is minimized. It's at the bottom of these cost curves. Okay. Ultimately, when you look at the first average total cost curve, you're going to pick a quantity that's a little left to the QA because from this quantity you go up on the average total cost curve. So if you're going to produce at this in a small scale, you're going to want to produce where you bottom out here on this average total cost curve. Notice that the cost per unit is lower for the smaller factory than the medium one overall if you look at these levels. Okay. The firm may be stuck with a medium factory in the short run, but in the long run, if they wish to produce this level of output, it would choose a smaller factory. So if they were here in the short run and they wanted to move back, they're going to reduce their factory size. But in the long run, if it wishes to produce this level of output in a medium level, it will choose or a smaller level, it will choose a smaller factory. Hence, the quantity that you produce on a smaller scale is less than QA. You want to go with this bottoming out area here. Now, in the second example, if you want to you want to produce a quantity slightly more than QA, you're going to produce, in the long run, you're going to have a medium-sized factory and produce in this area here where you minimize costs. Same argument can be made if you're doing it on a larger scale. If you need to produce more quantity, you want to produce at your average total cost curve where it minimizes here. Now this curve here looks like a migraine waiting to happen, but in the real world, factories come in many sizes, and each has its own short-run average total cost curve. See all these little black curves here? These are all short-run average total cost curves. And what they do when they bottom out, see here, where they bottom out, they all make up a long-run average total cost curve. Now, even though we have all these little short-run cost curves, this doesn't even do it justice. There's really millions of little, hundreds of thousands of little short-run average total cost curves that make up a long-run average total cost curve. So a typical long-run average total cost curve will look like this red curve here because it's made up of all these little thousands of short-run average total cost curves. Don't worry, you won't have to draw this on the test. So how does average total cost change as the scale of production changes? So if we move from a small to a medium to a large factory, as a lot of factories start out very small. Apple started in a garage. Obviously, they're not operating out of a garage now, so they've moved from very small to very large. Well, we look at economies of scale. Average total cost falls as quantity increases. And then that's this first part here. Average total cost falls as quantity increases. We get in increasing quantities, and we have our average total cost falling. That's economy of scale. So now when it flattens out here, constant returns to scale. Average total cost stays the same as quantity increases. That's this portion here in the middle. That's a constant return to scale. The average total cost is staying the same as quantity increases from here to here. Now, when we move into an area like diseconomies of scale, average total cost rises as quantity increases. And this is known as diseconomies of scale. On this long-run average total cost curve, we can see here that costs are rising over time as we produce more quantity. So you essentially have three segments: segment 1, segment 2, and segment 3. Label these segments. Well, you can see here that cost is decreasing. That's economies of scale. Costs are staying the same. That's constant returns to scale. Costs are going up. That's diseconomies of scale. You'll definitely have to be able to do that in homework in the test. Very simple. So we took a long road from here to here to here, but this is what matters. This long-run average total cost curve. When we're talking about long-run average total cost, we're going to have three areas: economies of scale, constant returns to scale, and diseconomies of scale. So continue on with how average total cost changes as the scale of production changes. Economies of scale occur when increasing production allows for greater specialization. Workers become more efficient when focusing on a narrow task. This is more common when the quantity is low. So when you start out, there's economies of scale to be utilized, to be garnered, as your workers become more efficient at producing what they produce. Now, diseconomies of scale are due to the coordination problems of large organizations. As you get to be this big behemoth of an organization, sometimes you have costs coming up because you can't control what all is going on. You really start to struggle with diseconomies of scale. Your costs start to go up. For example, your management gets stretched and they can't control all the costs. So this is more common when quantity is very high, when you have high production. So, in conclusion, costs are critically important to many business decisions, including production, pricing, and hiring. This chapter has just introduced the various cost concepts. The following chapters will show how firms use these concepts to maximize profits in various market structures. So this lays the tracks, or lays the groundwork for future work in cost in business and production. So in summary, implicit costs do not involve a cash outlay, yet they are just important as explicit costs to a firm's decisions. They're essentially opportunity costs. Accounting profit does not account for that, so it's revenue. Accounting profit is revenue minus explicit costs only, what you see on a balance sheet, whereas economic profit is revenue minus total cost, which is explicit plus implicit costs, making that decision whether to produce wheat or corn, making that decision to produce cars versus refrigerators. Those decisions are made in boardrooms every day. The production function shows the relationship between these output and inputs. Again, the production function can be graphical, as we've shown in this chapter. As we move forward, we'll show it more in formula form. As you move into more advanced economics, you'll definitely see it as an equation. If you ever take MBA courses, it'll be pretty much all an equation. So the production function, again, shows the relationship between inputs and outputs, how your input costs versus your output, how much you produce. The marginal product of labor is the increase in output from 1 unit increase in labor, holding all other inputs constant. The marginal products of other inputs are defined similarly. The marginal product usually diminishes as the input increases. Thus, as output rises, the production function becomes flatter and the total cost curve becomes steeper. It starts to creep up over time. Variable costs vary with output and fixed costs do not. So variable costs are variable and fixed costs are fixed. The marginal cost is the increase in total cost from an extra unit of production. The marginal cost curve is usually upward sloping. Think of that little Nike swoosh. Marginal costs are going to be increasingly important as you move forward, and we're talking about how much a business does produce, and we also consider marginal revenue. The average variable cost is a variable cost divided by output. Very simple. A lot of words, but it's very simple. Your cost, your variable cost divided by how much you produce. Average fixed cost is fixed cost divided by how much you produce, your output. Average fixed cost always falls as output increases because it's fixed. You're dividing that fixed cost by more and more quantity as you go over time. Now, variable costs can increase over time. So average total cost, sometimes called cost per unit, is total cost divided by the quantity of output. So the average total cost curve is generally very much U-shaped. The marginal cost curve intersects with the average total cost curve at the minimum average total cost. When the marginal cost is less than the average total cost falls as Q rises. However, when marginal cost is on that upswing, when marginal cost is greater than average total cost rises. It pulls it up. Think about the GPA example given in the text. In the long run, all costs are variable. You can change everything. Economies of scale is when average total cost falls as quantity rises, that first segment of the average total cost curve. Diseconomy scales is when average total cost rises as quantity rises. Think of that third segment of the average total cost curve we looked at. And then constant returns to scales, that middle portion. It's when average total cost remains constant as quantity rises. Lots and lots of information in this chapter. You're really not going to do well if you're not doing the reading and also doing this lecture and then working your way through the homework. It's just one of those things you're going to have to study to get. As always, I'm available to answer any of your questions via phone or office hours. You can also send me an email. I generally respond to those much more quickly. Thank you so much. Please let me know if you have any questions about the cost of production. Fascinating chapter, lays the foundation for our work moving forward. Thank you.